this is Stacy from Watercolor Together, and today is the lesson 2 for the absolute beginner. If you didn't get a chance to watch lesson 1, I will make sure to link it down there in the description. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about really quickly before I get started with the lesson is that I decided to start a Facebook page. And the reason I did that is because I had hoped I could have a community tab on YouTube and that we could share our artwork there. And so that if you finished one of these tutorials and you wanted to share what you had done or ask for some feedback, something like that, that you could post in that YouTube community tab. But it turns out the only person who can post photos in the community YouTube tab is me, the person who owns the channel, and not any of the subscribers. So that makes it not so useful for those purposes, and I decided, well, I'll just start a Facebook page. It is a private group, so you cannot see any of the content, anything that we post. So if you add or share pictures of your artwork, nobody will be able to see it other than the group members. And I do have a few questions that you have to answer before I approve your membership, and that'll just make sure that we are keeping it kind of secure, and it feels safe for everybody to post their artwork and share their progress in their journey. And so I will put a link to that in the description of this video as well. I added a prompt already for the lesson 1 from last week where we painted an apple, and so I'll add a prompt for this week's, and so if you want to add your photo, that would be awesome. Okay, so what today is going to be about is really just a continuation of what we did last week. I feel like value is so important. It's one of the things that you're going to work on from now until the end of your watercolor journey, like from now until forever, basically. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about color theory this time. We're going to talk about Analogous colors, which are colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel, and how they can help you develop value within an image. And then for our paint along at the end, it's going to be kind of a mini landscape. Landscapes are pretty tricky because there are a lot of things going on. So we're going to make this pretty beginner friendly, and then I think that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll talk about the supplies, look at the reference photo, and then get started. Okay, you are going to need your water jars. I like 2 water jars, one to rinse the paint off and one that I can grab clear water from, a water spritzer to wet down our paints and get them activated, a sponge for drying off your brush, your paint brushes. We're probably going to use a size 6 or 8. This is my size 6, but it's a very generous 6, so you might want a size 8, and then maybe like a size 5 or a size 4 for details. And then you're going to need your watercolor paint, paper. I've got a scrap paper, and we're going to look at this first just to kind of discuss some color theory. And then after that, we're going to need some paper to paint our composition on. I've got this Meeden watercolor paper. This is a 10 by 7 size, but you can make it smaller or bigger depending on what you have. If you want to paint on like a 9 by 12, or if you want to take a 9 by 12 and cut it in half and paint on a 6 by 9, that's fine. We're just going to use something in this landscape orientation. And then you're going to want some masking tape and a board to tape down to for when we work on our landscape. If you have a swatch chart for your paints, that's going to be great, and the color wheel. All right. I think, let me show our reference photo now. No, we'll do it later. Okay. Okay, so with our first tutorial, what we talked about in lesson is we talked about developing value, and we practiced pulling out value using a single color and using our water management to get something really light, to get a mid-tone, and to get a really dark value. And we did that by using a very heavy water to paint ratio, heavy water to get our lightest value, and then we used a lot more pigment and less water to get our darkest value, and then we found something in between for that middle value. What we're going to do this time, and this works really well with any subject we're painting, but particularly well when we're talking about something like a tree, which is what we're going to do in our landscape, is to use an Analogous color palette to develop our value. And so what Analogous means is that it is 2 colors that are or 3 colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So here, this green is what we're going to do for our middle tone, and then to get our darker values, we're going to add in some blue, which sits next to green on the color wheel. Or we're going to add in some yellow to get our lighter tones, which sits next to the color wheel over here. So I'm going to demonstrate that on this little scrap paper. You can paint along with me if you want to. It's kind of helpful to have these as reference later. So if you want to paint along and then we can label this, you can just throw it in like a folder or something like that just for your learning. That's what I like to do. But you don't have to. You can also just watch for this part if you like. Okay, so I'm going to get some water on my brush. A viewer asked me if I could make it so that you could see the water. So I cannot do that when I'm painting the actual pieces because I just don't have enough room. And I don't have the ability to do like a picture-in-picture or something like that. I'm just filming off of my simple camera. But what I can do when we do these little things is pull those jars forward. So hopefully you can see those. They should be in the frame. Okay, so I'm rinsing fresh water. I don't really need to do that because they're both fresh, but I think it's just for me habit. And we're going to start with our green. And I'm going to start with this sap green, which is my favorite green to use in landscapes. I like it because it can be pushed into a lot of different directions depending on what you're looking for. Okay, so this is kind of our middle value, right? And I'm gonna paint that in the, actually before I start, I wanna do a circle right here. All right, so I wanna leave room for that. Okay. Okay, I've got a nice kind of medium value. It's a nice ratio of paint to water. It's not super light, it's not super dark and thick. You can see it's just kind of in between. It's kind of that middle value of the sap green. And this is what my swatch chart looks like, right? This is that middle value. I don't know if you can even see, I've got my lightest value painted here and my darker value painted here. That's how I like to make my swatch charts. And so that's what I've got about here, somewhere kind of in the middle. And I'm gonna paint this in the middle. I'm just going to paint a nice big rectangle. I'm going to need to get a little more paint, so I'm going to scoop up some more and pop it on down. Okay, let's neaten up those edges. All right, so this is my middle value. If I were only using this color to create my darker values and my lighter values, what I would do is I would mix this up with less water and more paint to get a darker version of this exact color. And if I were using this as my lightest value, I would put more water in my mix and mix it up and get my lightest value, right? Because I have less paint. And that's what we did last week. Now what we're going to do, in order to develop our lighter value and our darker value, we're going to use color temperature. And we're going to do that, and also using the color wheel, you know, looking at either side. So we're going to push it to the warm side of the color wheel for our lighter values, and we're going to push it to the cool side of the color wheel for our darker shadows. And this is, oftentimes shadows are cooler. They have blue undertones, and where the sunlight hits is warmer. Not always, but often. And so we're going to use that idea to create value with temperature. And this is, again, using an Analogous. In this particular case, we're Analogous because we're using colors on either side of this green. And we can do that again, like I could pick another color, right? If I was painting something, an object that was red, I could push to orange for my lighter values, and I could push to red violet for my darker or shadowed areas. And if I was painting something that was yellow, I could push it to the green side for the shadows and the orange side for well, actually yellow is pretty warm, so I might not do that, but I could use those greens to make it appear darker, right? Starting with that with my lightest. Okay, so, and again, same thing here. Like blue, we can push yellow in to make it appear lighter, and push in those purples to make it appear cooler. So this really works no matter what color you're using, but I think it's most easily demonstrated with greens, and probably where you're most commonly going to use it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, in order to get my lighter value in my picture, I'm going to add yellow in so that I have a nice yellow-green. Now the interesting thing about this is that it's going to appear lighter, but the truth is that the pigment saturation is actually going to be really similar to what we have here, but it's going to feel lighter. I need a little more water in my brush. That's why I'm skipping across the paper there. All right, so this, there we go. This is lighter than this. It appears lighter, even though the saturation is similar, in part because we've pushed it with yellow. And I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm going to push blue into this green. I'm going to use phthalo blue green shade, and I'm going to mix that in with my sap green. I'm going to rinse off here. I need a little more water on my brush. There we go. I actually need to hydrate my paints a little better. Okay. If your paint is not coming out of your pan in the way that you want it to, it might be that you didn't spray them down enough, or maybe you're like me and you've been talking and they've dried out a little bit. Okay. Which is what's happening. So what you can do is just give them a spritz. All right, so now I have blue mixed in, and I'm going to paint that over here. Okay, so now you can see by adding blue, we look like we've got a darker value, but again, these are all relatively saturated, but because we're using color temperature to give the illusion of value, we look like we're painting a darker color. And blue does make it a little darker, and yellow does brighten things up a bit. All right, I hope that's making sense. I feel like I'm talking in circles. Sometimes that's how it feels to me. I'm not trying to. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I use this when I am mixing in my wells and I'm doing, like, working with a landscape, this is how I use my greens a lot, is that I just find this is a useful way to do it, is I tend to take my main green in the middle, which is often sap green, not always, but often. And then I mix my blues to the left side and my yellows to the right side. So let me pull in some yellows there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate how these three hues, because now we're not the same hue. Hue refers to the color. So hue means green or blue or yellow green. That's hue. Value is darkness, lighter or darker. And actually we could say tint or shade. That's the technical term. So like when you look at this, a tint means from the middle to the lightest, and a shade means from the middle to the darkest. But in the art world, often we talk about value and we can refer to light value or dark value. I think that's a little less confusing for people. Okay, what I'm going to do to give this circle some dimension and make it look three-dimensional, and I'm going to have a light source that comes this way. So let's give a little arrow here. I'm going to just start with this really nice light yellow right here, or the yellow green. It's not really yellow, it's yellow green. And then I'm going to take my sap green, my middle green, and I'm going to surround that. I'm going to kind of keep my edges wet. Do a little darker of my, little less water, a little more paint there. And now to develop my deeper area, I'm going to add that blue in there. So I've got a nice blue-green. That's what's going to pull in my temperature. Okay, and let's charge in. So charging means that you're adding more paint into an area that's wet. So this is wet. I'm going to charge in some really nice dark blue in here. Or it's a dark blue-green, right? And if I really want to make this look like it's really in shadow down here, I'm going to pop some just almost pure blue here. And I'm just going to charge in, because I'm just kind of tipping it in. That's what I think of it like. I'm just tipping the brush in, okay? And you see how now we've developed shape. We've developed some shape, and I can clean this up. This is just a quickie, right? We can clean this up by adding a little bit. I need to come in here. We can be fuss budgety about it. Adding a bit more green in here. And if you notice, as things start drying, everything starts to fade a little bit, and we're going to kind of come back in like that. Okay, and then I'm going to come in with just some clear water, but not a lot, and just soften this up a bit right here. Okay, so now we have a shape that looks more three-dimensional than if we had just painted it flat green. And we can add, you know what, a lot of times there's a little shadowing kind of in the back around here, so let's add that in just to make sure we've got a nice, there we go. There, okay. So, and if we can deepen up that shadow a bit more, because that's kind of fun. Okay, but I don't want to get super hung up on this, because this is really just a quickie demonstration that we're using Analogous colors in order to create dimension and add to our value. Now this is more saturated paint down here, but we're also adding in blue to further get that sense of value across. And so the way, let's just make a little note here, and we're just going to put on here Analogous colors. Okay, there we go. And so we started out with green, we pushed to yellow, and we pushed to blue. And then when we drew this little sphere, you can see that happening over here. Using that blue in the shadows and that kind of yellow in those lighter areas. And this has a lot of color all the way through. Okay, so this is a principle we're going to use when we paint our landscape. I'm going to share the reference photo. There will be a link to it in the description so that you can pull it up and print it out if you like, or be able to download it and have it on your computer if you want to practice the same image several times. All right, I'm going to put us on pause so that we can show the reference photo, and then let's get started on our painting. Okay, so this is a reference photo we're going to use. We are going to simplify it. We're going to get rid of that fence. We're going to get rid of the trees that are off in the distance in the horizon. I think that's going to complicate things. And we're going to just focus on the tree. We'll maybe do something a little bit with the sky, and then the grass. We're going to get rid of that like little path that's happening. So we're really going to simplify. And that is something that we do in landscapes all the time anyway. But for this, and when we're trying to make things a bit more beginner friendly, I think simplifying leads to a more successful piece. All right, so if you hadn't had, hopefully you've had a time to screenshot it, but again, you can also download it from the description. Okay, I've got my paper tape down. I'm going to just check here and make sure, yep, you can see everything in the view of the camera, so I think we're good to go. And let's do a quick sketch. Now, looking at that reference photo, we're going to simplify things, and we're really just going to focus on this tree. So that means I'm going to zoom it in just a little bit because this is the main event. And I like my tree to sit off. I don't want to put it right in the middle of my page. I'm actually going to put it off to the side just a bit. And I'm going to leave a nice amount of sky. And there is that fence line. We're going to ignore that fence line. And in the background, we are going to maybe make it a little interesting. Let's, whoops, like something goofy on there. All right, so I'm going to start at about where the middle, maybe the bottom third. So if I divided my page into thirds, so like 1, 2, 3, that bottom third is where I'm going to start. And I'm going to just kind of give it a little bit of a slant. It's on kind of a hill. Actually, let's go like this. That's a little prettier. Okay, and I think there's a bit of a, I'm going to let this, and then I'm going to, this isn't part of the image, but we're going to do it because I think it'll be fun. We're going to make it look a little bit rolling here. So we're going to just kind of pull this up here. It's too high. Okay, here we go. There. All right. This gives it a little extra interest. And our tree is going to be coming right about here. And we're gonna develop the base. So if I took my page again in thirds, I'm gonna put my, like here, I'm just kind of using my fingers and estimating my third is about here, right? that's where the trunk of my tree is going to go. And so I'm going to just, I never like to leave my tree trunks exactly like they're coming into the ground and they're branching down into the ground, right? And so I don't ever just, a lot of times I make them a little wonky on the bottom. It just seems a bit more natural to me. This tree actually has a relatively short trunk. The branches are pretty low on this, and it's very triangular shaped. And so I'm going to go right up. To me, it's easiest to kind of bring that straight up, right? And it just helps me to get my shape right. And you can see it's not perfectly pointed at the top. It kind of like has this like little crookedness. But we're not going to be particularly, we don't have to be perfect about this, right? And I'm going to look at the proportions using my fingers. I can see, looking at the reference photo, that it is as, like, if I look at this, it's almost as wide at the bottom as it is tall. So if I'm here, I need to go here. But I like to kind of like, I tap my pencil a lot in order to get proportion. So like I'm here and I'm here. This is kind of my middle. So boom, boom, boom. And now I'm going to kind of go boom. You could use a ruler. But you see how like I'm kind of like bump, 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 bump. It just gives me a little bit of a rhythm in order to find my points, because I need a bit of a reference point. And what's interesting about this tree is that this side kind of angles up a little bit. Like you can see it comes down and it angles and then it comes up, right? It's actually even more so. Kind of rounds out and angles down like this. There we go. On this side, and then on this side it doesn't, and it kind of comes up like this. It doesn't really do that over here. On here, this side it kind of comes down and it kind of, it's a little bit more, comes in a little bit here. It's a little more like raggedy on this side. I don't know why, but it just is, right? This is just how this tree is. Okay, so we're gonna do that, and I think this is looking a little too perfect on it. I'm gonna get rid of all of my lines in between using my kneaded eraser. This is why it's important to draw nice and light. I actually draw a little heavier when I'm doing these videos so that you can see my lines. I ordinarily draw super light. Okay, I'm gonna just kind of make this a little raggedy, like it's a little too perfect. And you can see it like comes in and out, you know, it comes in and out like that. Okay, that's a little better. Let's get this little, I like how this top angles up and down. Okay, there we go. So there's my tree. Very triangular in shape. And we've got this, and I'm not going to worry about that. We've got some branching in the middle that we can kind of see somewhere in the middle here. I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. We're going to try to keep this basic. We'll go back and paint trees later, but remember, this is at the beginner, and this lesson is really meant for somebody who's just starting out. And so if I make this too complicated, and then it's not going to be fun, and you're going to have a hard time achieving success. So I'm really focused on making these tutorials and videos pretty achievable, and that means that we're going to simplify. Okay, we've got our tree shape, right? And it is, actually it comes out a little wider here. Now I'm fuss budgeting, but that's okay. I'd rather fuss budget with my pencil and get it how I like it and make sure that I feel like I have a good composition than get halfway through painting and go, ooh, I should have messed with that a bit more. Okay, there. Oh, I think that's better. Okay, now you are welcome to take a screenshot of this and transfer it to your paper, but I do encourage you to try practice drawing because it's a really good skill to develop. I think that at some point, I know when I first started, my drawing skills were terrible. And so I was doing a lot of tracing, and then at some point that sort of halted my progress, and I needed to work on my drawing skills in order to move forward in my watercolor skills. Okay, there we go. And we're leaving off, like I said, all of the extras we're leaving off. We're just going to focus on this tree. So we're going to do a nice sky, and we're going to paint in our tree, and we're going to do a little bit of work in the grass, and we're going to use some tone here to put this off in the distance. there's kind of like a yellowy field back there. So we're going to do that because I think it's kind of pretty. Okay, so we are going to start with our blue, and the sky here has got some clouds, and so we're going to do a little bit of that. You're going to want a paper towel close by. This one's a little wet, damp, but that's okay. Dry paper towel. Let me get a dry paper towel. Okay. Ooh, here's a little quick trick. I take my paper towels and tear them down in smaller sizes, and I keep them in a jar close to where I'm painting so that I don't have to pull off of the roll. I just find it's easier to work that way. I can grab them easily, these little rolls. If I'm tearing them off of a fresh roll of paper towels and then I'm trying to tear it down so I'm not wasteful, and I just need a paper towel really quickly, then, you know, things dry fast sometimes, and so this makes it just easy for me. Okay, let's start with, let me lighten this up just a bit more. Otherwise, we're going to see that a lot of that pencil mark in the painting. Okay, let's start with our big brush. I'm going to start with my size 14. This is a silver black velvet brush, and we're going to start with the sky. And we're going to paint the sky right through the tree, and then we're going to go right into the ground, and we're going to paint that all so that the wet edges kind of bleed together a bit, and just so it's nice and soft. And the blue that I like to use for my sky is cobalt blue, but you can use phthalo blue green shade if you want to. It wouldn't be a bad idea to use phthalo blue green shade because that's what we're going to use. Actually, let's do that. Okay, I don't usually use this color for the sky, but we're going to. All right, let me pull that up here. See how blue-green it is? See how different those two puddles are? This is phthalo blue-green shade. And we're going to use the phthalo blue-green shade for our tree. And so it is nice to keep everything very it harmonizes your painting when you're using the same colors. So rather than pulling in a new blue. But what I do need to do is add a tiny bit of quinacridone rose. There we go. Do you see how that instantly changed the color? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I still have the undertones of that phthalo blue-green shade, so it's going to blend well with my trees. But I've taken a little bit of that blue-green out, and I'm neutralizing it a bit because I don't want... I'm making a very, very watery puddle. Lots and lots and lots of water. I'm pulling my brush out of my water jar. Let me show you. I'm pulling it directly out of my water jar and pulling that puddle of water here. I like my skies, especially when I first start. You can always build more value in. I like to start with my sky being really light. Okay, and the color, it's usually more color at the top and less color at the bottom. So we're going to drag, that's still a lot of blue. That's okay. And I'm going to just drag some water here. I'm going to I was going to go right through, I kind of want to go through the tree. I usually go through the tree. There's just a lot of color in here. All right, so it's fine. Listen to me talk away. This has been kind of my day. I don't know. It's been a weird day. Do you ever have a day where things just don't seem to work no matter what you do? It's like, and then you just feel like, I just need to go to bed. Try again tomorrow. That's been kind of how I felt today. Okay. So we're gonna, now my paper is really nice and wet. I'm just grabbing water at this point. I'm not even grabbing any paint on it just to get the rest of the tree in there. So now we're gonna grab some of our sap green. I'm gonna make a pile of sap green, and I'm gonna grab not my lemon yellow, but instead I'm gonna use my warmer yellow, which is this yellow azo medium. Okay, and we're gonna pull this. I'm popping a little pink in there, a little bit of my pink to get this kind of browny color. Because we're off in the distance. I'm gonna let that blend together and soften. And now let's go back to our same mixture of the green and yellow that's in here. And let's pull that close to the tree. I have to be careful that's pretty dark. Kind of come around the tree trunk here. And I'm just kind of scrubbing up my paper a little bit, right? And we're going to kind of come like this. There we go. And I'm going to pull a little bit more green. There's a little bit of blue left over there from that earlier exercise that's going to be in there. Right here. Okay. This is our base, right? I'm going to kind of come here and lighten this up a little bit with my paper towel. Gives it a little bit of texture. I don't like how dark some of that is. Okay, there we go. Okay. That just gives us a background. I must have had a bit of blue in my brush still. Like a chunk. That happens sometimes. Okay. I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. See what I mean? Like little things that don't ordinarily happen to me are just happening. I just can't seem to work out today. I don't know. This is the day I should probably just be like watching a movie or something. Okay, and we've got some fuzzy things happening here. That's cool. This is going to look like kind of trees in the distance. I like when our sky and our background sort of blend together. And we can go back in at the end and add as much detail as we want, or we can just leave it alone. There are some clouds in this picture, so I'm going to go back to my blue and I'm going to add a bit more of my quinacridone pink in, or my quinacridone rose actually, into my blue, and I'm going to make this kind of gray purpley color. And I am going to make sure it's well mixed so I don't get any more weird chunks of paint. And you can see there's some I'm not going to do the whole sky, but there's just some clouds that are kind of coming in like this. I'm going to dance my brush down in here. Now I'm going to rinse my brush off and have just some water, and I'm going to just soften that up, right? Soften that upwards. And here. And now I'm going to take this paper towel and I'm just going to kind of pull with it. And it's going to just create some texture. Okay. Now I'm going to pull in some color again. I'm just kind of looking at my reference photo. I'm keeping these really simple. A little more color, a little more value, a little bit of pouncing to keep it soft. And then we're going to kind of come in. It's got kind of like, it kind of comes in like this. So I'm using my brush on its side and I'm just kind of bouncing it around. You see how we're just kind of bouncing it around? And then I'm just popping my paper towel in there. And I'm kind of doing that intermittently between the two. And it just creates some interest in the sky. We've got some of these clouds that are interesting looking. And we can create a little bit more value in here if we want to, because there is some darkness here. We don't really have this like streaming white happening in the photo, so I can kind of pull these together a bit. And there's a little bit more like that comes in here. Okay, I think we're gonna leave it at that. All right, it just makes for a bit more interesting sky than if we just left it plain. All right, now we're gonna focus on the star of this picture, which is the tree. Our paper might still be a little bit damp and we might move, some of our green might move off a little bit into the, towards the sky. And so we're not gonna have a super hard edge, but I think it's gonna have kind of a cool effect, so we're not gonna worry about it. I'm gonna put away the size 14, we're gonna be done with that. I'm gonna pull up my size 6 brush, but my size 6 is a very generous size 6. This is a size 6 that most brush companies make. So you should probably grab your size 8. I just like to mention that because, because mine are a little different. Now, what we're going to do, you can see in this reference photo that our light is coming from this way. This is the darker side of the tree and this is the lighter side of the tree. So I'm going to add a little arrow right kind of here. It's kind of a reminder. I like to do that. I draw this on my tape all the time so that I can remind myself where my light source is coming in, and then I'm always thinking about that as I'm painting. I don't get lost. Okay, and now what we're going to do is grab our yellow. I'm going to use that as a yellow medium, which is kind of a warmer yellow. And I'm going to mix it in really well to my puddle here. I'm going to add a bit of water because I want to have a nice, I want it to be a bit more yellow than I have right now. So keep going until you get a nice yellowy mix. Lots of water because we want to have a nice diluted paint. We're gonna go soft and light. I like to start soft and light, and then we can always add in deeper and deeper color as we go. I'm gonna add in more water. Oh, there we go. See how we've got a lot of, I'm gonna add a bit more yellow. Okay, we've got a really warm yellowy green now, and there's a lot of water. It's pretty diluted. And we're gonna use that to just paint through our whole tree. We're just gonna paint in that whole shape that we made. And I'm gonna kind of dance around my brush. And if I have a little bit of sky showing through, that's good, because we have a little bit of sky showing through in the reference photo, because trees are not solid. So I'm gonna kind of intentionally do that here a little bit. I'm extending out from past my lines a bit, but that's okay, because I want to have those spaces. All right, and we're just gonna fill in, and I'm kind of keeping my edges wet. I'm thinking about coming back, like if I work here, then I move back here so that everything is flowing in. So that's a trick, right? Like we have, this is all part of water management, is that if you move slowly, and this is really hard to do when you're new, because when you're new, you want to take your time. But if you move really slowly, your paint starts to dry on your paper, and then you get hard edges, and when you go back in and paint your next, it doesn't blend in together. You don't have a nice even wash. Instead, you see all these brush marks. And so if you're getting a lot of brush marks because you're moving slowly and carefully, that's okay. It happens when you're new, so don't worry about it, but that is why that's happening. And so you got to kind of move quickly. It's okay to move quickly and not be happy with it and go back and practice again, or maybe do it slowly the first time and then try painting the same thing over again with a little bit more speed, and you're going to find that your colors blend together better. This is a medium that takes a long time to master. So if things aren't turning out how you expect them to, just try again. And I can show you what we can do with paintings that don't work out. Maybe I'll do that as a separate video, because you can make some really cute bookmarks, you can make gift tags, things like that. So I don't want you to feel like if you wreck it, your paper is wasted. There are other things we can do to transform your painting into something new. All right, while I've been talking, what I'm watching is my paper. So it's still wet. I can see that there's a little bit of sheen, but it's not super wet, just where the tree is. And so if I go, okay, so if the paper is shiny wet and I go in with my second layer, it's going to do a lot of moving, and I want kind of a medium. So this is water management, where we're looking at how much water's in my paper, how much water's in my brush, how much water's in my paint. And so I'm just kind of waiting here, chatting a little bit. I want it to be wet. I don't want it to be sopping wet. And so, and you can kind of tilt your paper, and you can kind of just pay attention and see. I've got a teeny bit of dampness to it. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, now I'm going to go in with my sap green into this same spot, right? And I'm going to just mix it in so that I have green mixed in with this puddle of paint. I've got a nice big, now I had a lot of water in here, so it's going to take a little bit of paint to develop some nice value. But I'm going to pick up, now this side of my tree is going to be lighter, this side of my tree is going to be darker. I'm not going to try to define every branch. If we try to do that, we're going to get really frustrated. That is something that we can do when we get into more advanced painting. Right now, as a beginner, all we're really trying to do is show that this is a tree that's got dimension to it. And so we're not focused on individual branches. Now, the spots that a tree tends to be darker is in the middle. Not always, but it tends to be darker in the middle, because all of the branches, when you're looking through, this is where it's most like all of the branches come into this space, right? And so you're looking through the depth of the tree, and you've got a lot of leaves that are stacking on top of each other and just creating a darker. So I'm going to start in the middle and see how my paper is still wet, but it's not soaking. That's what I wanted. This is what you're going to get with cotton paper. If you're not getting this because you're working on cellulose paper, that's why. So don't be upset with yourself. Just know that when you work on cellulose paper, and it is a great, I know it's an affordable option when you're first getting started, but your results might be a little different. So just, be ready to expect that. Now I'm going to, you see how it's softened there? My light's coming this way, so I'm going to leave this side of my tree light, and I'm adding my green in over here. Now I'm going to tip in a little bit of green just on this out, like in some of this outside, right? Because I don't want it to be a solid yellow here, so I'm just going to kind of tip in a bit of green along here. And I might just give a little, I don't want it to be super regular, right? I'm just tipping it in into some places. And when I say tipping in, I'm just kind of dancing my brush around. I've got just a little bit of paint on it. I'm holding it very loose. If I want to have a loose brush, I tend to hold it towards the end. If I'm holding my brush here, I tend to be tight and controlled. But by pulling my brush to the end, I just get a little looser with it. It's harder to be too controlled, and it helps me to just kind of dance around. So I'm just dancing some color in, right? Now, what we want to do is start to develop a bigger shadow. This is where it's lightest, so it's a little more color here, right? A little more color here. Now, what we're going to do is add in some of our phthalo green blue shade into our paint puddle here so that we're darkening it up. Now here's a trick. I'm going to add a teeny bit of quinacridone rose. Quinacridone rose, red is, look at how that drastically changes my shade. Quinacridone rose is like a red tone, and it sits opposite of the color wheel from green. So I guess we're going to touch on complementary colors here too. So because it sits opposite here, it's going to neutralize my color. So in the shadows, the color often is a bit grayed out. So we can use a bit of the complementary color to gray it out. All right, so now I'm just going to come in to the darkest parts of my tree, which are here. I'm not painting it in solid, just kind of dancing it around. On this side and in the center, because we're pretty dark right here in the center. We'll probably go back in and add a little more color, and I'm going to add just a little bit down to the bottom here because it is a little darker down here. The sun's coming this way, so the lightest part of the tree is here, and we're coming down this way. Look at how nice that's looking. I'm just going to kind of tip this in. We're going to go nice and dark here. Okay, so now my paper is still nice and wet. It's not sopping wet, but I'm charging in this paint and it's dispersing well. Now, if you're charging in your paint and you're getting these really weird textures, it's called a water bloom, and that's happening because you have too much water in your brush. So when you're doing this, or it might be that your paint, you're not letting it dry quite enough. See, again, I'm talking a little bit. What I can see is that my paper is where I've just added that darker value with that mix of phthalo blue green shade and a little bit of that quin rose. That part is really shiny right now. If I touch this, I am going to start dispersing the paint and get some weird effects. So I want my paper to stay damp, but I don't want it to be this wet. So if you go in too soon, then that's when you get a water bloom. Let me see if I can demonstrate that. Okay, this is a good, because we're waiting for this to dry a bit anyway. This is going to be a good time to demonstrate this. I've just got one of my scrap pieces of paper, and so if I go in, I'm just going to get some paint right here, right? Let's get a little more yellow to that. Okay, so let's say like I go in, right? Here we go. And I want to charge in my blue or my darker mixture, right? And I just go right in like this. And I go in too soon and I start moving around. You see how and actually, I'm going to get something called water blooms pretty easily, which means I've got too much water in my brush, and what it's doing is it's disrupting that bottom layer. So you have to let it dry a little bit. And I'm trying to exaggerate this, but you can see I'm mixing as I'm tapping in. It's not just tapping, it's not just tipping in the color, it's creating these weird lighter spots. Sometimes you want to do that. Like there are times when you're looking for that, where you can take even just clear water into your paint to create a little bloom. But in this case, that's not what we're looking for. And so, and you can see it's really, really wet because it's really shiny. So that's where we just have to, this is part of that water management where we're waiting for our paper to be at just the right spot before we start pushing more color in so that we don't disrupt the underlayer. Okay, I hope that kind of explains that. I'm gonna push this to the side. And I'm still pretty wet. I'm looking and I can see a reflection. I can see that my paper is kind of shiny. So I don't want to dry it. I'm not going to use a dryer to dry it, because if I do that, I'm going to create new problems because I want my paper to be damp. So what I'll do sometimes when that happens is I'll go back in and redevelop some other things. So I want to kind of redevelop this line a bit. So I'm going to just grab some of my yellow And I'm going to neutralize that with a bit of Quin Rose right in here. Oh, look at how that makes such a pretty gold, right? It's like a golden green color. And we're just going to kind of come in here again. And I'm just going to kind of push that in, right? And I'm going to add a bit more of the yellow as we get to here. And now I'm going to pull some of my sap green into that whole mix. And I'm going to kind of come in there, like that. I like that yellowy color. I think we're going to continue that, just that warmer color. It's kind of nice, even though that's not what's in the picture. Okay, I think, yeah, let's do that. Let's just keep it warmer. Look at that, isn't that lovely? Okay, so now I'm going to kind of come here. And we're just going to kind of fill this in with that nice warmer mixture. And I'm going to let this kind of, I'm going to kind of come on either side. And then let's add a bit more green back to it, right? And just get it a little greener as it comes forward. And I'm letting my brush kind of skip over the paint here. And we've got some base color, so I'm gonna leave these in because I think they're kind of cool. So I've kind of got these spaces where I've got no color. It's what's on the paper from below. Okay, and that's just giving me the reason I'll do this all the time when I'm painting something and I'm like, okay, this is too wet and I don't want to mess with it anymore. I kind of distract myself by working on something else. Now see how we had that bloom up before? Remember, we weren't going to do trees in the background, but lucky for us, our paper decided for us that we were. And so now I don't want to mess with this mix because I want to keep this for my tree, but I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add my quinacridone rose and my sap green. Look at how beautifully brown that is. Sap green and Quin Rose make a beautiful brown. But now I'm going to throw in some of my phthalo blue-green shade. And I'm going to get this really soft blue-gray. Actually, I want a little more gray, so I'm going to add a little more pink. Do you see how gray that is? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for a green-gray. There we go. So sometimes it takes me a bit to get the exact mix I want, right? And that's because I wanted a green gray to be off in the distance. Now I'm gonna water it down by pulling it this way a little bit with water in my brush. I've got quite a bit of water in my brush to pull out and dilute, but now I'm going to take some of that water out because I don't want too much water in my brush when I go to my paper. I don't want to flood my paper. So I'm going to take this color, now that I've diluted it, and I'm just going to come here and I'm going to do a little stand of trees back here. And I'm going to do that by just dancing my brush around. I'm making like little horizontal lines. Okay, and then as we get closer to the horizon, I'm going to go back to my slightly darker where I didn't dilute it with water. And I'm just going to kind of click that in there. Click. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, and I'm just kind of right above the horizon. And now I'm going to get my smallest brush, or not smallest, but smaller brush. I'm going to get my size 4. I'm watching my paper. Now my paper is not as shiny. I don't want to let that dry all the way. So I'm working on this, but I'm also making sure to manage what's going on in my paper over here. And I'm just going to grab this maybe a little darker. I'm going to put a little more blue in there to get a little darker, a little more pink. Okay, and now I'm just going to come down and I'm going to just do some tree trunks. And we can use a little bit of that darker color just to give an illusion of like towards the bottom, right? The bottom is a little darker because of the sun. Okay, And if your paper didn't do that weird blooming thing like mine did, you might not want to do this little part. Okay, in the meantime, what has happened, and then I'm going to go, I like to just give a little shadow. I'm going to add a little bit more green. This was unexpected. I didn't plan on doing this. But that's what happens with watercolor all the time. Oops, too much. What happens all the time with watercolor is you are working and something unexpected happens, and then you just work it into your painting. You figure out how to work it in. Okay, see, now I've got a nice dark blue-gray again, and I'm just going to kind of come along here. Just give it a little definite. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we've got some interesting trees off in the background. Okay, this is still damp, but it's not shiny at all anymore, which is what I was looking for. Now we're gonna go in and develop our darkest colors. And I'm looking at my reference photo, and that's gonna be in the middle to this side and down at the bottom. The bottom of the tree is dark and the middle is dark. If I stopped here, and this is what new people do a lot of times, when you first start with watercolors, you're like, okay, I'm done because I've got a light and a dark. But the reality is that this is more mid than it is a really dark value. Dark values are really dark, and that's what makes your painting just sort of pop off of the page. And so, but I think there's a hesitancy for people to paint as darkly as they need to get really good value. All right, so I don't know what I'm doing there. I don't need yellow. All right, so we're gonna pull out, we're gonna pull out a good batch of our sap green. And we're going to pull in our phthalo blue green shade, because that's the blue we've been using throughout, right? And we've got a nice intense, both of these colors get nice intense, which is great. But I want to add just a touch of my quinacridone rose, and I went right in with my paint. I muddy up my colors all the time, and I just clean them up when I need to. But it's probably a good idea to rinse your brush first. I'm going to add a bit more. And so I'm just going to add enough Quin Rose until I get to just the right kind of grayed out dark green that I want. And I'm pretty happy with that. If I wanted to test it, I could grab that little piece of paper just to give it a quick test. Oh, I love that. That's really beautiful. But I think I might want just a touch more pink. Yep, see how that gives it a bit more grayish undertone? That pink neutralizes things. Okay. So now we're going to come in here, and you can see I'm drier, so I'm not flowing as much, but I don't want to be flowing as much when I'm doing this this part of the tree. I'm going to come up into the middle here because it's dark in the middle, and then I'm going to come down around here like this. And this looks like, oh my gosh, it's really dark, Stacy. What are you doing? I want it to be really dark because watercolors dry lighter, and I'm leaving some of my green underneath. I'm kind of dancing around, right? And as I come up here, I've got less paint on my brush. I'm going to grab a bit more of I'm going to kind of blend this in. So I'm going to grab some of my sap green, and I'm just going to kind of come in here just to kind of blend this a bit, right? So that the transition isn't quite so jarring. All right, now I've rinsed off my brush. I'm pulling the water out, and I'm going to come back in with just a bit more of the sap green, but a bit less of it on my brush, a little more muted, just to kind of blend this out a bit. All right, now this feels really, really dark, but it's going to give our tree really nice value, and that's what we want. If you look at the reference photo, there is really good value, and I'm going to kind of dance this around a bit right here. There. Okay, I'm just going to charge in a bit more paint. Okay, so now while this is still wet, I want to add my stem. And so I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because I want a bit more control. So I'm going to move to my size 4 brush. And I'm going to come over here where I had mixed up these kind of grayed out colors. I'm going to grab my, right here, yep. I'm going to grab my sap green by phthalo blue. So I have a nice green blue, and now I'm going to start adding in that Quin Rose until I get a nice deep brown. Isn't that amazing? I just love the way that color works together. Like, who would think to mix green and pink together to get a brown? I mean, it makes sense because color theory wise it does. Okay, now, and this trunk is really dark, so we want it to be really dark. I'm going to maybe add just a bit more It's almost black. Oh, that was too much. Okay, we're just, okay, see, I'm gonna have to okay, there we go. Oh, there, that's exactly it. I think that's pretty much what I had. Okay, now I'm gonna come down and I'm gonna just work my trunk in here, and it gets a little wider at the bottom. And so I like to bring my trunk out just a little bit. I just always do. It just feels more stable to me. And one side usually comes out a bit more. I don't know why, but I don't just like that. Okay, and then we've got kind of this tree has low branches. I can kind of see we've got a branch that's coming off this way. So I'm going to do that. It's supporting this tree. And then we can kind of see one in here, but it's up a little higher. All right, now what we can do, so I just want to darken that up. Okay, you can kind of see a little bit of the branch up here, but we're not going to do that. Sometimes I bring the trunk up into the tree a bit. I'm gonna kind of push it up here a little bit, just a little bit, so that it doesn't look like it's just stopping. But this tree is pretty full, and you can kind of see it in here, but I feel like if I add, this is where you're eliminating details. If I bring this really dark color, even if I watered it way down, it's going to create a contrast up at the top of the tree that's going to kind of conflict with what I'm trying to do with it, which is to really develop the value of that light and dark side of the tree. And so I'm not going to, this is what I mean, eliminating details. We're not trying to paint around individual leaves. We're not trying to paint around individual branches or anything like that. We're just really trying to paint out this tree and give it some nice dimension and shape by using value and a light source, right? So that's, but what we are going to do is paint a beautiful shadow underneath. So I'm going to switch back to my slightly bigger brush while my stump is still wet, and I'm going to pull a little bit more green into this mixture that we had here, right? So now I have a nice green-gray mixture. It's pretty dark. I don't have too much water in my brush. I'm actually going to get some water out. So I'm going to wipe it on the side of my glass, touch to my sponge like this here. I'm just touching it to my sponge because that pulls out extra water so that I have almost a dry brush. Not totally, but kind of dryish. Pulling that gray. And now we're just going to go like this. And what's going to happen is the sun's coming this way. We're going to have shadow everywhere, but it's going to be darker and bigger to this side. And you can even see that in the picture. And I'm going to let that stump just kind of bleed into there. And there we go. It kind of extends out that way. All right. And I'm going to make sure it meets here. Right there. Okay. Oh, I like that. All right. Now I'm going to let this, again, water management. I'm watching here. I'm pretty wet because I just painted that down. I want to add and pump in and charge in a bit more darkness right here. I'm going to do a little bit of extra blue to here because blue is nice and cool. That was too much. Add a bit of my quinacridone rose, a bit of my green. There we go. So now I have this nice like dark blue green. A little bit more quin rose just to gray it out a bit. Okay, and a little bit more. I'm just playing with the color. There we go. I've got a nice gray green. That's what we're looking for. And I'm just going to come in. This is not shiny anymore. It's still wet, so it's still going to flow nicely, and the edges are going to be soft, which is what I'm looking for. And I'm just going to put a little bit more darkness right here, because this is where the shadow is the most intense, right? And then I'm going to get my pink and my blue and my green to make a really deep color. It's almost black. And I'm going to do that. I'm just going to tip right down here. I'm giving some dimension to my trunk, and I'm tipping that in to the left side of the trunk, this branch. And I'm letting it flood just a little bit into this part of the shadow. you see now we've got this really nice deep value, and we've got this shadow, and it just makes things come to life. Okay, this was a really, really simple landscape. We kept our tree shape really basic, but I think that it was effective. If you are a beginner, this is what you want to do is, don't try to, if you try to jump in, I mean, of course you can always try things. If you try to jump into a really complicated landscape, it's going to be much harder to achieve results that you're happy with. So it's important to simplify when you're first starting and really focus on managing how much water is on your paper, how much water is in your brush, what your dilution, what your dilutions are in your paint mixes, and then managing those soft edges versus hard edges on your paper, which we did with the apple. We've done that again here. And really thinking about value, not being afraid to go too dark, because if we had stopped, this picture would not have had nearly as much life as it has now, because we kept going, right? And then we took advantage of something that, like I expected the edge here to blend a little bit, but I didn't expect it to blend quite as much as it did over here, to bleed up into the sky. And so it gave us an opportunity to do some trees in the distance, which I wasn't really planning on, but it's taking advantage of those unexpected moments as well. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, it's great if you give me a like. It helps other people find the video. If you want to see more of the same thing, then go ahead and hit subscribe. And then don't forget about that Facebook group that we talked about at the beginning. That link is in the description. And with that, I think we're done. So I will see you next week for lesson 3. Oh, wait, tape peel. Oh my gosh. Okay, we have to peel off the tape. Now what I'm going to do, it's going to get loud for a second. I'm going to hit the dryer on the tape edges so that they come off nicely. By heating up the adhesive, it makes sure that it peels off without peeling off my paper. So I'm going to do that. All right. That just ensures that we don't rip our paper surface. And, oh, that's always so fun to do. Sometimes I forget to do that at the end of the video. In part because I tend to like to let my painting dry 100% on my board. This might curl a little because I'm taking it off early, but that's okay, it's worth it. Okay, and then the very last thing, what do we always do when we paint, is we sign. Even the things we don't love, because it helps us with our, helps us see our progress. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign this. And I'm going to date it 08-2025. All right, thanks for watching.